Hello, everyone, and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven, and this is my colleague.
Hello, my name is Marie.
Hey, sorry, we've been gone for the last 2 weeks because I was at KubeCon EU and I met some of you. I had a talk on emergent load testing. We will put out the recording to that video when it's on YouTube. Also, I wanted to briefly mention before we jump in that K6 version 0.44 is out. So here are some release notes because there's a lot that happened. And I just want to run through the things that have recently happened. There's Grafana Cloud K6. This isn't part of the K6 release, but we do have K6 running on Grafana Cloud now, which is a huge thing. In the next few months, we're going to be transitioning a lot of the features into Grafana Cloud to get feature parity with K6 Cloud. There's also been on the ecosystem front, there have been a lot of changes to some extensions like K6 operator improvements. Apparently, we could do simultaneous tests now through K6 operator. There's disruptor stuff. We can now inject faults into gRPC services. Um, and we can also, we also have Docker images for
Mm.
XK6. So you no longer have to have a full Go environment and then build a custom binary that way, which is really a huge deal.
Save some time, yeah.
Yeah, and then also XK6 Kubernetes received a major cleanup of some deprecated APIs. It's getting some love these days. Lots of other things. Read this blog post that I'm about to link because it covers not just stuff from this release, but also general ecosystem news for K6. But let's jump into what we're supposed to talk about because we have a lot to cover. So
Yeah.
let's talk about what even is Core Web Vitals.
Yeah, I think first we can start to define because Core Web Vitals is a subset of Google's Web Vitals, which is an initiative that Google started. Because I remember when I first started with web performance, there's so many metrics, and I didn't really know which one is more important. Um, there's so many things that I guess it's not very standardized, and it can get quite confusing, especially if this is your first time with web performance and you're not necessarily like an expert. So I think from Google side, they created this Web Vitals initiative to unify some standard, to set some guidelines on you know how to measure not just your page performance but also the user experience, because I guess the existing metrics that were out there. So if we're talking about things like the DOM content loaded, like if you want to measure like how quick the DOM has loaded, or you want to measure like the first contentful paint, first meaningful paint. There's so many things that you have to consider. But then, like, yes, it can give you an indication of your page's performance, but then ultimately it doesn't really give you an accurate measure of the overall user experience. And so I don't exactly know when they introduced the Web Vitals, but then they basically said that, yep, as of today, these are the standard. And then within the Web Vitals we have this thing called the core Web Vitals. So these are the really important metrics that people need to know. This applies to all websites, this applies to all web pages. And I think in a nutshell, it gives you that nice breakdown of it gives you a good measure of your page's loading performance, but at the same time it gives you a measure of your page interactivity as well. and your page sort of like visual loading indication if things are moving um along as what your user expects, so they're not being redirected to a lot of different places. So yep, I think it's more of these are the guidelines when it comes to web performance. Like we can even think of it as, like, I guess, like the green or like the golden signal. So on backend performance we have the golden signal, so I guess this is the golden signal on the front end performance side.
Yeah, and I think Google is really the leader when it comes to these things because they have a very big advantage over pretty much anyone else, that they are the biggest search engine. And so they're using that to their advantage by gathering a lot of information about a lot of sites. So when it comes to like having an archive of industry standards for different industries, they're pretty much unparalleled.
Yeah.
So with the core web vitals, um, I know I was reading. I thought it was a very strong and opinionated way to say it, but they said that they believe every site owner should be tracking these three things. And that's actually what prompted me to be like, "Hey, I have a site. I should be doing this."
Yeah, you
I
should be
felt like
measuring.
personally called out, you know, because I am not tracking that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is a good way as well to show that, whichever background you're coming from. So, there's like different ways on how we can measure it, and later we can show, to everyone that, yeah, you don't just have to use a single tool. You can use like a combination of different tools, and even with people who doesn't have much, I guess, performance like experience, like even if you have, like, for example, a site owner like who just wants to really measure all these different guidelines, then there are tools that are equipped for them.
So shall we talk about the core web vitals? Maybe we can
Yeah,
go and talk about what they are in theory.
yeah. Should I add your? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so so they basically measure three different things. The first is loading, which is kind of rendering, really, because I don't know, for
Mm-hmm.
me, loading is an ambiguous term, but it's actually rendering on the front end, on the
Yeah,
client side. And then the second one measures interactivity or like responsiveness. And the third
yeah,
one is for visibility and how often things are jumping around and how big those jumps are. Do you
yeah.
want to talk about largest contentful paint? Because there are
There,
so many metrics.
Yeah. So, and I guess this is related to what I said as well at the beginning. Like when I first started, like I was so confused as to, okay, what's the difference between, browser first paint, or like the first meaningful paint, or the first contentful
Yeah.
paint. There's so many, and I don't really know if they are, I guess, if they're important to me, because at the end of the day, like for me, it's important that I have a really swift, response time, like a swift user experience. And from what I can see, the largest contentful paint is, sort of an accurate measure for that, because it basically calculates how long does it take for your browser to render like the largest piece of like element that's in your DOM. So whether that's an image, whether that's like a video, or something like a really big block, then you know the time for that is like, because that's like the element that we most visually see as a user. So if we can see that largest, element getting rendered as quickly as possible, then that's a good sign that, okay, yep, your site has a good measure of performance. Whereas, like, previous metrics, like the first contentful paint, first meaningful paint, like again, those aren't really good indicators, like just for my personal opinion, because then if the first contentful paint has reported something that, okay, it has rendered this really small piece of element, but that's not really what we want to see, because we're more interested in, I don't know, seeing like a video, or like seeing like the heading or something like that. So this is why it's one of the core web vitals, because they've, basically said that this is a really good measure to measure like your browse your pages performance in terms of like the speed. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I think ideally it would be really cool to use this first meaningful paint, because that's really just in terms of the theory, that's really what we want to do. We want to somehow quantify like when what is a meaningful render, which elements, and then measure that. But that's not difficult. That's not easy to quantify.
Yeah.
And so what Google found was, let's just pick the largest element, and it's an approximation, but it's going to be good
Make it
most of the
simpler,
time.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so the next one, first input delay. So this one is about interactivity. It's the time that it takes between a user trying to interact with something and when it
Yeah.
actually starts to get processed.
Yeah. Yep, I think this is like a really good, measure, and I'm glad that they've added this as part of the core web vital, because like a key important aspect of, user experience is like how quick an element can be in that state where you can interact with it. So again, previous measures, like for example, you might have a really quick DOM content loaded time, or like the page has fully loaded, but then that's just one aspect of performance. The other aspect is the actual interact the actual interaction bit. So if you click an element, but then like the experience is still a bit sluggish, then even though you have a really good largest contentful paint time, or like you have a good like page performance time, then there's still some aspect where the experience is not as good. And this is like a really good measure of it, because then you can see, okay, which of the specific element here is not as great in terms of the interactivity. Like where can I make some more optimization? Maybe there's some I guess some JavaScript files that are blocking specific interactions that maybe we can optimize. So yeah, this is a great measure.
Okay, and then the third one is cumulative layout shift, and it measures visual stability. So
Yeah.
they actually have a really cool, I think it's a video or is it a GIF or something here?
Yeah, I think I've
Here,
seen
okay.
that.
So this person wants to say no, go back, but then
Yeah.
if you saw it shifted, and this person actually submitted the order, and then they're like, no, 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 but
Yeah.
too late. So that's
Yeah.
a pretty, drastic example
Yeah.
of what can happen if the layout shifts. But
Yeah.
even if like you're just trying to show something, like I mean, I'm guilty of this sometimes too when I'm trying to show someone a page and they're reading along with me and then I'm like, "Oh, where
Yeah.
was that again?" And they're like, wait. I just
Yeah.
lost my page, my
I think
spot."
as well. Yeah, this is more common on mobile devices, because um out of all the different web vitals, I think this was the metric that was, recently introduced. I don't know when, but I remember before, like when we were doing some web performance improvements on a previous project that I was part of, they were like, "Oh, Google's gonna introduce new set of core web vitals," and this was something that we weren't like really aware of. And I think it's because, yeah, like mobile user experience most of the time. And an example that I can think of is, let's say you're visiting like a news website, and then you suddenly you you have the article that you want to visit, but then suddenly like the whole layout just shifted because more articles have, displayed, and it's just annoying because then you have to find that image, that article again. So it's just
Yeah.
really that, like, experience that you don't really want to frustrate your users more, especially if you have a lot of um images or elements that you have lazy loaded. And I think this is why with lazy loading, people need to be careful, not to apply too much, or really use the recommended practices, because if an image has lazy loaded like right at the end, then it can, shift like the entire layout. So yeah, I think, yeah, this is one of those annoying like experience when you experience like visiting a website,
Yeah.
you finally found, the element or like the information that you want, and then like suddenly it's just shifted, and then you're like, where is it? Where is that information that I want? Yeah.
Yeah. So we could also talk about like what Google recommends for each of these. So this is I find this really good because this is obviously informed. This isn't just Google saying this is what it should be. They're actually
Mm,
looking at what a lot of sites are doing, and they're trying to correlate that somehow with things like traffic or attention. So I think it's
mm,
worth paying attention to it, but it's also worth tweaking. If you have information about your application that's more specific, then you should go for that rather than these general rules of thumb. But they're still good to know. So for largest contentful paint, 2.5 seconds or less is a good thing. And I
yeah.
remember that this used to be 3 seconds. So like it's our attention spans are growing shorter and shorter for sure. But interestingly, the first input delay is 100 milliseconds. So what that says
Mm,
is we're willing to me it says that we're willing to generally wait for things to load, but we want to be able to interact with things right away. Like
yeah.
if you go to a page and you really just want to log in, then we do expect to just be able to click on that login and not have to load the rest of the page even maybe.
Yeah. One thing as well to just say here is, because like from, for example, from K6 perspective, we show like different percentiles. Like whenever we show the end of summary, we show what is it like for 90, for the 90th percentile of our users, or for the 95th percentile. So with all these different measurements, Google actually recommends, looking at the 75th percentile as a recommendation. So yep, that's also something that, we're trying to see if we could, get that included as part of our K6, browser. But yes, from Google, they recommend looking at the 75th percentile of your like user base.
Yeah, that's a good point because you're going to get very different things. I think the 75th percentile one is a lot more lenient actually.
Yeah.
I personally would probably still go a little bit higher, but it's a good
Yeah.
it's a good place to start.
Yeah.
With cumulative layout shift, this is different because this isn't time. They assign like a score depending on how many there are, like how many occur, but also the degree of the shift. Because
Yeah.
a slight shift is very different from the entire page changing or something like that. So for them, it's zero point 0.1 and below. That's good.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk about how we would measure this in K6 browser.
Nice. Yeah. Well, so I think one important update that we didn't mention as part of, like when this episode started, was as of K6
Oh
release
yeah.
version 0.44, we're now natively support, so we now natively support the core web vitals and the other web vitals as well. So this was something that, we've just introduced. because on previous versions of K6 browser, we were monitoring like a different set of metrics. And I think I've mentioned this, like, at the beginning, where these metrics might be a good measure of your page's performance, but not necessarily the user experience. And so we want to align with what Google recommends, and it offers like familiarity as well to other users who have used other tools and they want to try K6 browser. So I'm really happy that, yeah, we're now supporting the Web Vitals natively as well. But like one thing that we also didn't, I guess, cover, because we were talking about the core Web Vitals, is like the other Web Vitals. So maybe we can discuss them a bit, but not too much in detail. But the other Web
Sure.
Vitals, so like we're also tracking them as part of like a K6 browser test, but from Google's perspective, like the other Web Vitals are like, it's an optional like recommendation. So you don't really need to, I guess, put as much as importance as compared with the core Web Vitals, but it's still a good set of additional guidelines if you want to further diagnose your pages like performance, and if you want to really improve like the user experience a bit more. So from their perspective, like, yep, focus on the core Web Vitals, and then if you have some, I guess, additional time or like resources, then we also have like other Web Vitals for you to track. So K6 browser also tracks those other Web Vitals. And yeah, it's now part of K6 natively, which is really awesome.
Yeah, so let me show that as well. So, okay, disclaimer. This isn't a perfect script and it's not a perfect application, all right, but it's a test. So, like tests can also fail, right? But I'm going to show you what to do. So this is by the way, we didn't mention it in this episode. We have mentioned it previously though, that K6 browser used to be XK6 browser, a separate
Yeah.
extension. But now it's part of the experimental module, so it's kind of like graduated from the extension part, and it's gotten
Yeah.
a bit closer to core because now you just have to do this one import line that I've got highlighted, and
Yeah.
then you can try it out. So if you update to the latest version of K6, well, I think it was like 40.042 that it came
Mhm.
out or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But if you update your version to the latest, you'll be now able to use it as an experimental module. That way you don't
Mm.
have to even build a Docker image or anything or a custom
Yeah.
binary.
Yeah.
So
One
this is
disclaimer
yeah.
before we start. So it's still highly experimental. So if in future releases we're still gonna be introducing a lot of breaking changes, because as part of this release as well, one breaking change that we've introduced is we've now made the page, like locator.click as asynchronous as well, and uses the await keyword, whereas on previous release that wasn't the case. So like it's still very experimental. There's still a lot of new features being added. So yeah, have patience with us if your script suddenly doesn't work in future versions of K6.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like you're talking to me.
In general.
So this is a simple script. It's basically going to my site because that's what I wanted to test, and I felt called out by Google's thing of all site owners should know how to do that, should be doing this. So okay, it's going to the home page. It's sleeping. It's checking to make sure that it got to the right page, and then it's going to another page and then checking that as well. So I'm kind of going quickly through this because we have covered how to write a browser test before, but I actually wanted to run it because that's how we're going to see the metrics. One thing to call out is that you do need to have this environment variable k6 browser enabled equals true. I still think eventually we should remove that and just
Yeah.
test it, but it is for security reasons as
Yeah.
well. So you have to put that and then do the usual k6 run test.js or whatever. So I'm going to run this and increase that a bit. Okay. Okay, good. You can see that. So it's opening it up here. That's my site. And it has a lot of warning things here, but those aren't errors yet. And it
Yeah.
is checking for, so it checked for what was there for the text, and then it went to another page, and now it's parsing that to see what's there as well. So
Yeah.
this is all running not headlessly because I set this flag to false. But
Yeah.
if you want to, you can just set it to true if you're running it, at load or
Yeah.
just more instances of it, then you can flip that over to true as well. So,
By default as well. So if you just remove that headless option, so that will just run it on a headless browser. Yeah.
okay, cool. So this is what it looks like. So these are ignore the errors. It's a test. So okay.
Yeah.
um so it got to the browse the home page. Here are all of the metrics. Now, usually there's only without browser, you wouldn't be getting this bit here.
Yeah.
All of these are pretty new, and these are some of the ones that we were talking about. And it also includes time to first byte and first contentful paint. So this is
Yeah.
what Marie was saying, that it's core web vitals plus other stuff.
Plus other, yeah. One thing to so I think there's a lot of maybe information that we can digest here, because on previous releases of K6 browser, so if you scroll up a bit. So yeah,
Oh, right.
yeah, because previously, so this is what I was talking about. Like we were also like we were tracking a different set of browser metrics. So we were tracking browser DOM content loaded, browser first paint, browser first contentful paint, and browser first meaningful paint. So as of K6 version 0.44, we've now removed browser first meaningful paint because that is now deprecated. Google doesn't recommend that you track that. And then because first contentful paint is actually part of the other web vital, so we don't want to show any duplicate. So we've just completely removed the browser first contentful paint, and that is now replaced by web vital first contentful paint. You might also notice that one of the core web vital that we discussed a while ago. So if you scroll back again, back down again, Nicole. Yeah. So you see here that we don't have the first input delay, and this is because like you didn't really interact with the page. There's no actual user interaction. You just navigate on a specific page, and this is why that particular metric hasn't been reported, which is fine.
Oh.
But things like the
I
largest
okay, so I
contentful
should
page.
script that then. I should click on
Yeah.
something.
So yeah, so one, like if for example you click on a button, or you filled in a specific form, click on a button, then you should be able to see a measure of that metric. I think we have that as an example as part of our K6 documentation. Um, so we just use our demo site, and then because that script on our K6 docs, it involves like filling in a form, clicking the button, so you could see that as part of the overall metric, the input delay as well as the other web vitals have also been reported. But yep, that is why sometimes these different metrics might vary, because it depends on the action that you're actually doing.
Okay. And another thing that I wanted to point out is you'll notice that there are these green checks on the left here. And that's because up here I kind of didn't talk about it. I am setting some thresholds. So I do have that 75th percentile ones according to what Google recommended, because I wanted to try that out. But it's cool
Mm.
that because they're metrics and because K6 browser is just it uses K6 still, it's able to you can do anything with those metrics that you would with other metrics. So it's it's just like any other metric that you can track and have thresholds on, and so I've included them here. So that
Yeah.
is also pretty handy, and luckily for my, simple little test, it was a pass for those two that I
Yeah.
was checking for.
Your
Um
website is performant. Yeah.
well, yeah,
So,
except, I need to
yeah.
improve the
Oh,
actual test.
yeah.
I'm
Although
wondering if I should. Yeah.
yeah. Just I guess just one thing. So as part as well of, the way we report the metric, you might notice that after each row of, the web vital, it also has another row after, which says cumulative layout shift, if that is good, if it needs improvement, or if it's poor. So currently this is how we present to our users if the specific metric is, good, if it needs improvement. The number that's like corresponding there, that's the counter. So K6 browser uses the Web Vital JS library. Um, so basically, this is, saying that, okay, as part of, this particular test, the API found cumulative layout shift to be good, one. So it acts like as a counter. But again, like in, in future releases, this could all well change, because we still want to present it in a, much better way, that is easier to understand. And then if you scroll back up, like the rest of the browser metrics that are still there, like the DOM content loaded, first paint, and loaded. So eventually we're also gonna remove that as part of like future, versions of K6. So we really just want to focus on the web vitals, make sure that it's, you know, the key sort of point, rather than showing other, I guess, confusing metrics to our user. Like simplify it, just use what's recommended, by Google, and really focus on how we can help our users improve the user experience. And that's via the different web vitals.
So, Marie, do you mind if I go through more of the use case stuff since I already have
Yeah,
it up here?
sounds good.
Okay, so just for a bit of context, I'm one of those people that runs tests as part of a CI pipeline for my puny little site because I can. And so I have had a test. I have been defining a test within GitHub Actions. So my site is just on GitHub pages. It's really like this is not really something that I need to do. I'm running a load test, but it's really just a very small test for it was more the exercise of being able to commit something and push it to GitHub and then have an action go in and run tests on it every time I push something. So
Mhm.
I have this browser test that I just created like about an hour ago, but I already had this protocol level test, which is probably more familiar. So it is getting some resources and it's going to some of the same pages. But now I'm putting them together, and this is like a runner script. So I'm importing these two, both of the scripts that I've shown you, the protocol one and the browser one. And then I have two scenarios, one for backend, one for front end, and they're
Mhm.
set differently. So as you can see, like it's just 10 users on the protocol level and 3 on the browser. I mean, like it's small, but it's not that small that it can't handle 13 plus normal load. So I
Mhm.
figured that that was okay. And the key thing is this is set up by schedule and by when I push something, when I push a change, like I put a new blog post, and that way I don't have to worry about it firing off. And then I also have this part. I am still using K6 Cloud. We will eventually be able to do this in Grafana Cloud too.
Yeah.
But for now, this is what I'm showing. So it's going to my account, and it's going to a particular project within that. So on GitHub, I'm going to show you what that looks like. So we have a an action for K6. You can also use a Docker image, but I don't know. I just use this one because I think it's easier. So you can set up a new workflow on GitHub and then use this action, and then you can use the sample here. That's what you're going to need to put in. One thing is you're going to have to get an API token. Don't put that in the actual config though. Put it in the secrets in GitHub. And let me show you what it looks like for me, not the secret, the other stuff.
Hmm.
So okay, here is the part where I'm specifying which file name I wanted to actually run. I wanted to run the runner script, which will then run the protocol one and the front end one. So this is that runner script, which is running
Yeah.
both. And then, oh, Marie, this is what you were asking earlier. So I'm passing it as a
Yeah.
flag. So I originally tried it this way. I don't think
Mhm.
it works this way. I think it
Mm.
works this way, though. So you
That's
have to
interesting.
pass it as an environment variable.
Yeah. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is I
So
think yeah, this is really, that intermediate use case. So maybe after this, like, because at the moment we don't have this example added on the like landing page for like the GitHub, action marketplace, so we can even have an example there on how to
yeah.
run a browser test. Yeah, this is really cool.
Oh, so let's answer a question from Rafael Barbosa. Is there no image? There is. So, oh, I don't have it up, but there is a blog post. GitHub Actions K6, it's the first one. So you can also use the Docker image here.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to use the marketplace app, you can just use that. I'm just showing the action.
Yeah, this is something though. So we have raised an issue from our side, because maybe in the future we want to publish like a separate official Docker image with the browser installed. Because yep, I haven't tried, using like this specific Docker image and then run the browser test, but I don't know, there might be an issue in terms of like maybe it doesn't have a browser. But this is something that, yeah, we need to test on. But there is like an issue that we know we've raised, because to make it, I guess, simpler, especially if users want to run it on, like a Chromium browser, then we might want to have a separate image with that browser added, just to make it simpler.
That makes sense. Also, I want to mention that I am running this on K6 Cloud. However, we don't actually have Core Web Vitals on the cloud yet, but
Not
I
yet.
promise it's coming. I actually found this out after I had gone through the entire exercise. So, okay, but I still have browser tests and I will be able to see them when they come very soon, I hope. But let me show you what that looks like. So this is me pushing things and setting up this flow. This is within my GitHub Actions section. And if we go into one of them, you'll see that there was a K6 load test that was executed. And when we click into that, these are all the flags that it used. And because I connected it to my cloud account, I can also click on that and go to and see like this nice visualization of that run. This is what that looked like. And we'll see the two scenarios here, front end and the protocol one. And they're also slightly different because the protocol one had 10 virtual users. and you'll see all of these are protocol level stuff because they're the HTTP requests. And this is where you will be able to see, because right now I am checking on something that's not there yet.
Mm,
But I still thought that this was a very cool example of like a preview of how this could work within your workflow. So if we go back to the project, you'll see this is something that runs continuously. And it's
yeah.
so easy when you run this a lot, when you run this all the time, it's so easy to see like, okay, wait, why is that one so much higher than the others? And the more continuously, the more runs you have, the more you'll be able to pick up on those trends. Another thing is like, just briefly, I'm not going to show how I set this up, but I do have notifications. Can I
Oh
make this
wow.
bigger? Yeah. Yeah, so this is like a Slack workspace that I have just for things like this that I'm playing around with. So you can even have it set up to send notifications when tests fail. So like
Yeah.
that one failed, and you can go to that test result as well.
Nice. Yeah. This is like a really like real what is that? Like a real
Sorry, my
use.
neighbor just suddenly decided they were going to start drilling.
But yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, this is like a really great example of yeah how you can use K6 browser, as part of like your performance testing workflow. Because I guess like so far, because K6 browser is still really new, we've just been really showing some basic scenarios, but now yeah it's really starting to be more mature, and now we support web vitals, and then we're also going to be adding that soon as part of the K6 cloud. Like they're thinking of like the design for it and everything, so yeah it sounds very exciting at the moment.
So could you I
Yeah.
was trying to time it for when they weren't drilling. Could you tell us other ways to measure these vitals?
Yeah. Um let me just add this. Hopefully it looks a bit bigger. But yeah, I think like one of, the questions that we might have is, how is it different from the existing, tools that, we're already using. So on previous episode, like we've talked about, how you can use Lighthouse, how you can use your very own Chrome developer tools, because from Chrome they also have the other tabs like performance and performance insights. But when it comes to measuring like the core web vitals, like I guess it's good to distinguish first that there's two set of data that it uses. Like for the core web vitals, so this really needs like field data, or real user monitoring data, because we want to collect data from our users. Whereas with Google Lighthouse, like it's just using lab data, meaning your test is being run on a predefined environment, it's using some predefined settings, so it's very much controlled. And it's one of the reason as well why it's quite popular for testing your application's performance earlier on, because if you only rely on field data, then it might not be accurate, because then you'll have to wait until you've got something, or like other tools, like you have to wait until your site has a lot of traffic before you can accurately measure, for example, the different core web vitals. So it's sort of like a good balance, that when it comes to measuring core web vitals, you need to combine with like a different tools. So one of the first tool that is actually recommended by Google is to use this tool called, let me just share this instead, page speed insights. So all you need to do is just go to the page speed insight URL. So in this particular example, I've just added, let's just quickly analyze the k6.io/docs. And what you see here, so page speed insight, so it's also using Lighthouse. So you can see here that it looks very familiar if you're coming in from, if you're already quite familiar in using Google Lighthouse. But at the same time, it's also using real data. So it's, like they have a section here where you're actually discovering what your real users are experiencing. So that's one of the good thing about page speed insights, because it's combining both lab data and field data. So at least you're not just relying with, like a set of control data. Like it's getting a subset of, what your real users are, experiencing. At the same time, like, yep, this is like, if you're already using Lighthouse, then you can also get a like the same sort of like overview of the difference, of the different areas, not just performance but also things like accessibility, best practices, and SEO. Obviously, the caveat with this is it's just analyzing your page on a very high level. So this is just on, the initial page load. Whereas if you want something that, I guess, you want to script specific user interactions, then this is where tools like K6 browser, or if you're using the Web Vital JS library, or if you're using other frameworks as well, like, Cypress, they have a plugin, but I don't think they're using page speed insights, but instead they're using Lighthouse. So depending on the framework that you're using, you can script specific user interactions and then get the Lighthouse scores after that. But then again, you'll be missing, like, for example, the first input delay, because this only relies with, you know like with the field data, whereas Lighthouse, their alternative is to present the total blocking time, which is a good alternative. But then again, this is why, you want a combination of like different tools. So this is quite an easy to use tool. So the other one, so this one, so if you're like a site owner, and currently I don't have enough usage data, because I don't have a lot of traffic at the moment on my blog. But if you go, so if you're a site owner, like, if so, you're probably already using search console, like, to check, I guess, which pages are like performing well. But then you can also just monitor the core web vitals, built in as part of search console. Again, caveat, so this needs like a high traffic website to work. And again, this only inspects your page on a high level, so you still would need other tool if you want to really measure your performance on like a very, like, deep dive kind of way.
Maybe
The
I
other
can
one, yeah,
share my screen because I'm interested in this.
yeah,
I've never looked at this. So maybe you
okay,
could
yeah, let's
show
have
me
some
what
traffic.
I should look at.
Okay, so let's share your screen, yeah, your one. Yeah, so if you
Okay, let me
go,
increase this.
yeah, so if you click Core Web Vitals just under the experience section, there you
Okay.
go.
Cool, I'm learning something.
Cool, that's
Oh
so cool.
no, what is this? This is so
So
bad.
so maybe if you click like open report, like on the side, there's,
Oh,
yeah.
yikes. This is
And
very
then
bad. Maybe I should have done this before streaming.
if you scroll down, like, we should be, is that view data about good URLs. Yep. Okay. So there you go. So the reason why some of
Cool.
the pages are poor, needs improvement, is, yep, your LCP is longer than the recommended, and it also shows you like the affected URL. So this is
Oh,
why this is great for, like, site owners, because they can just easily check which URLs they need to focus on. And then, yep, this is something as well that, you can track continuously. So after you've made some improvements, then you can track, like, the search console. um it it's it's not gonna be as accurate in terms of like, is this the current, data? Because I think they do the refresh like every 28 days or something like that. So
Mm.
this might necessarily show you the latest accurate data. And this is why you combine it with, lab data such as what Google Lighthouse is, showing to us, so that at least you can test, for your performance earlier on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been very eye-opening. I clearly have stuff to work on.
Yeah. Wait, I forgot. Let me just share my screen again. Where am
Do you want
I?
me to do
Okay.
it? Okay.
And then the other one, so this is using the Chrome user experience report. So basically, like, this is using like really big data sets, like, from millions of, different data coming from your real users. Again, this doesn't work if your page doesn't have, much traffic. But yeah, I think this is, I guess, the most accurate measure, because this really targets, a lot of, data coming in from your users. But yeah, you can see here that, so it's just a, dashboard that you share with your users. But basically it gives you, the different core web vitals, and then you can just look at specific metrics. It's just loading, and yeah, you can see, like, for each month, whether, the specific metric is good, whether it has regress or whether it has improved. And it's just, one of those like nice reports that, yep, site owners can also track when it comes to measuring the different web vitals.
What is this called again?
So this is the Chrome user experience report. So if you just search the dashboard for Chrome user experience, and then you add the URL that you want to track, it's gonna give you a unique URL, which will be your, dashboard. So this you can share with, your team, depending on like the specific like URL that you get. And yeah, it's just, I think they have an API version as well. But if you just want to quickly, have a dashboard set up, then yep, this is one of the tools that Google recommends when it comes to, really tracking the core web vitals as accurate as possible. The one that K6 browser is using, so I think I've mentioned we're using the Web Vital JS library. So it's one of the easiest ways to track the core Web Vitals. But I think in terms of the results, it's not gonna be, the same as what we see here from Chrome user experience. But then it should still give you like a really good indication of, how good like your different like core web vitals metrics are. But yep, I think if, like we're using K6, so we in K6 browser, we're using the Web Vital JS library, so we can safely say that yeah, we're using, real user data to basically measure the different metrics. So at the same time, you can use that in conjunction with, tools that are using lab data, um, Google Lighthouse being one of the most popular one.
Okay. I'm wondering if we can get to that blog post that you haven't even published yet, but I've already read it and I think it's awesome. But
Yeah.
I really I also have questions about the difference between K6 browser and Lighthouse, and you
Mhm.
have this cool table that I'm wondering if you'd be willing to show.
Yeah. Should we share the actual table for the blog? I think I have to find it.
I might have it because I think a lot of people would have the question, including myself, of like, okay, you said that K6 browser uses field data, right? But how do we
Mm-hmm.
get lab data? Because it seems like that's also something that we would want.
Yeah. Okay, I think I have it. So maybe I can. Oh wait, you have it already. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So the main
point
reason
view.
for
Okay.
this blog post, we haven't published this yet, because I think we're gonna publish this on the Grafana blog, rather than the K6 blog. But this is just, yep, this is just an open pull request. So one of the first questions that we have, and like even on like previous K6 office hours, is how is this different from Lighthouse? Like, can I track the same metrics that Lighthouse provides? And um so both K6 browser and Lighthouse. So in terms of similarity, both of them gives you a measure of, how performant your page is in terms of like the front end performance, and it gives you that good indication whether your site has a good user experience or not. Both of them as well is using the web vitals as the metrics. But then there's a lot of differences actually. So first and foremost, so I think you're already on the core web vitals section, so we can talk about that. So even though both K6 browser and Lighthouse, even though both of them are using web vitals,
Layout shift.
um layout shift. First, the first
Sorry.
input delay. So this isn't supported natively by Lighthouse, and because this requires a real user interaction. Lighthouse by default, they only analyze like the initial page load. Although something that I haven't tried is they've introduced user flows now, in recent versions of Lighthouse. I haven't tried it
Hmm.
yet. That's why I haven't really talked about it. But apparently, if you want to measure user interaction as well, then you can now do that with Lighthouse. If you scroll down a bit with the other web vitals, so the other difference as well is you can see that we monitor other web vitals different from what Lighthouse monitors. And it's because we're using the web vital JS library. So a good example is the interaction to next page. This is still an experimental web vital metric, but because we're using web vital JS, that's why we're also displaying that information. Whereas Lighthouse, they as an alternative of not showing first input delay, they're displaying the total blocking time and time to interactive, which are good metrics to basically monitor if you want to measure your size interactivity. The other difference is this lab versus field data comparison. And we've talked about this already, but Lighthouse only uses lab data. So they run your tests against a controlled environment. They have settings that are there by default, like which device, which network setting. And by using that lab data, like it it allows you to test for performance earlier on. Whereas if you're just relying on field data like the Chrome user experience report, there's some caveats, because like you might not even have the data if your website doesn't have that much traffic. So it's a good alternative that you look at lab data. And then the main difference with the K6 browsers, because we're using the Web Vitals JS library, and because we have an API that can provide, a way for users, a way for us to mimic, user interactions, then we're able to provide the first input delay. So essentially, we can provide that real user monitoring, and therefore we can provide some field data um, to our users. There's other difference as well. So I think I've added like a summary table if you scroll down a bit. Yeah. So in terms of test execution with K6 browser at the moment, we can only run it via K6 OSS, though in the future it will be supported as part of the K6 cloud. And then with Lighthouse, so this isn't the full list, but you can run it as part of DevTools, as part of the page speed insights. There used to be a Chrome extension as well that is still available, but they actually recommend that you use the Chrome DevTools instead, because the browser extension doesn't work with local sites or pages that requires authentication. And then if you want to programmatically use Lighthouse, they also have a Lighthouse library that you can install, which is like a node module that you can just easily install. What we measure, so K6 browser only measures, the performance, whereas Lighthouse is more like the overall quality of your application from a performance perspective, accessibility, SEO, best practices, and if you have a single page application as well, it can also, give you some recommended improvements on that area. And then performance scope. So we've talked about this hybrid performance test. You've demoed as well, how you can combine both browser level and protocol level. So with K6 browser, we can do this natively because it's part of, the K6 ecosystem. Whereas with Lighthouse, if you want to do like a hybrid performance, you have to use Lighthouse simultaneously with other, back end like protocol tools like, maybe K6 or like other tools. So again, like the scope of Lighthouse is only to give you a measure of your front end of your application's front end like performance. And then yeah, we've already talked about the metrics and the lab versus field data. So as you can see, like even though there's a lot of differences between the two, both of them, is trying to give the user an option to measure, your web's like performance. So it's kind of solving the same issue but like in different ways.
So, serious question, because here you have a question, can I use both tools? And it
Yeah.
seems like the answer is yes. But my
Yeah.
serious question is, should I use both tools, or is there like just too much overlap for it to
I
be
I think
useful?
I think for me, cuz like if I really just want to do something really quickly, like I don't want to script, something, then the first thing I would do is just launch, Chrome and then open up DevTools, look at Lighthouse, and then, if there's any low fruit issues, like low hanging fruit issues that I can fix, then why not? And then after that, if I want it to be, integrated as part of my CI/CD pipeline, if I want to, check the performance of like different scenarios where I interact with my page a bit more, then I would use K6 browser for that. So like I can really use, the same tools, and it's more on like it can cover both lab and field data, because for me to have a more holistic view of how good my different core web vitals are, I would need to have both.
Okay, that's good to know. I will work on it on doing both of them on my
Yeah.
little site.
We need like a follow-up K6 office hours just to see how
Yeah.
you
Okay, well, just to close off, I do want to say that I'm going to be speaking at Observability Con on the road in Singapore in 2 weeks. This is May 16th. I'm going to be talking about how to avoid the most common mistakes when monitoring Kubernetes in particular. And that's going to be followed by Observability Con on the road in Sydney 2 days later. And I'm going to be
Mm,
talking about how to prevent issues from hitting customers by using load testing and tracing together. So basically K6 and Tempo. So
nice.
thank you so
Yeah,
much for joining us. Thanks, Maria. I actually really learned a lot that I'm going to
thank
personally implement as well.
nice. Yeah. Well, thank you all. Yeah. I hope you all learned something today.
All right. See you all next week.